Hi, everybody. This is Matt Berkowitz. What follows is a recent interview I had on Peter Schiff's radio show, Schiff Radio, on October 3rd, 2013, for an approximately 20-minute segment. Given that Peter Schiff is an ardent defender of free market capitalism, I didn't expect much agreement on his behalf, nor to be able to make as many points as I wanted to in such a short time. So rather than play the whole interview in its raw form, I'm going to pause it along the way to offer clarification and counter several fallacies and narrow points Peter Schiff made along the way. These essentially revolve around him filtering through all my points through free market ideology, replete with all the value assumptions inherent within it. So let's get at it.
Joining our program now is Matt Berkowitz, and Matt is the coordinator for the Vancouver chapter of the Zeitgeist movement and part of its international lecture team. Since joining the Zeitgeist movement in 2009, Matt became a main media spokesperson and lecturer for the movement. He's written several newspaper articles and has given many lectures about subject matters and issues pertaining to the Zeitgeist movement, spanning from economics to sociology. Matt, welcome to the Peter Schiff Show.
Thanks very much for having me on, Peter. I appreciate it.
Okay, for those of us who are unfamiliar, what exactly is the Zeitgeist movement?
We're a grassroots social organization that emanated out of, or essentially emanated out of the influence of the films, the Zeitgeist film trilogy, that basically puts forward a new kind of analysis, or analysis not really seen in the mainstream media. It's not really a capitalist perspective, a socialist perspective, a communist perspective, or anything like that, but really looks at the world's problems and understands that we have the scientific and technological understanding to solve all these problems, yet it's simply not considered viable in the current economic climate. So basically, the movement works to educate the public.
What problems are you specifically referring to? Because from my perspective, the biggest problem we have is that we have too much government, and that's all around the world, not just the United States. We don't have enough free market capitalism, and that if we had freer markets, that we would be freer to solve our problems. Instead, we have the government that continuously creates and compounds problems and prevents the market from solving them.
Let's pause there for a moment. Peter's now gone and made his central argument that essentially all the world's problems that exist today are a function of government interfering in the free market. He doesn't go as far as anarcho-capitalists who think that there should be no government at all, but he advocates for extremely limited government, suggesting that the market, if left free from regulation, would create the socially optimal outcome. I was only able to make one point about this topic, which he didn't respond to. To reiterate, we need to consider the socioeconomic system structure at its root. If tomorrow we decided to limit government to a size that Schiff finds acceptable, what would prevent it from becoming what it is today, which is essentially a consortium of corporate interests that uses this mechanism of power and control to usurp more power and control? What would stop the government from becoming corrupted by financial interests? By reducing the size of government or even eliminating it, you're not doing a damn thing to change the social reinforcers of human behavior. The system is still dominated by the motivation to seek competitive advantage and destroy other producing companies who may interfere. There's still massive incentive for corruption, there's still a built-in social stratification and income inequality producing mechanism that is a result of this competition, and there's still the economic motivation to promote consumption at the highest levels possible. I'll stop there for now and continue on with the interview.
So, what problems in particular are you thinking about, and what are the solutions that you're proposing?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm quite familiar with your perspective, and I actually very much appreciate your work. I've been quite an avid follower, actually, of a lot of your material over the last few years, and I definitely appreciate the perspective that you give it. In terms of the actual problems we're denoting, over 1 billion people living in poverty around the world, the mass concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, the climate destabilization, environmental destruction that's going on worldwide. These are obviously problems, and I guess you would say that government's played a big role in either creating them or exacerbating them. And I guess we just take a further step back. If the one way we look at it is if we were to simply limit the size of government, it would simply be a matter of time before government got bigger again and started to become more corrupt and created, all the same problems that we have today. So, and the reason for this is because the same behavioral propensities that the market system create would simply, they would still be in existence. The whole climate for human behavior would still be the same. I mean, if you just limited the size of government, the incentive for corruption would still be there.
But what is the zeitgeist movement? So you have all this poverty, which I believe is a function of too much government in the areas that are impoverished. But you have this poverty, you have this income inequality, which is always going to be there. You're always going to have income inequality because nobody is equal. But
have to pause there as I didn't get to counter this erroneous assertion. The fact that none of us are equal with respect to our abilities, talents, strengths, and weaknesses, and so forth, says nothing about the social system that generates inequality through its inherent structural mechanisms. Saying there's always going to be income inequality is just pure market ideology mindlock. It really just exemplifies the inability to consider a social arrangement where people's weaknesses don't make them vulnerable to not having their needs met, and where people's strengths don't lead to elitist behavior. Or put another way, one that rewards people who perform certain behavior in the marketplace and punishes people who aren't successful with respect to the market.
Yes, I agree that it is now at a point that is not normal in a free market because of the influence of governments and central bankers. But you have all these problems. What is the zeitgeist movement solution? What are you proposing be done to solve the problems?
Okay, so let's go into that. It's not like you prefaced. We advocate that the world ought to submit to the wisdom of scientists. If you want to give it a label, we can call it a resource-based economy or a natural law economy. Basically, the physical reference for the economic model that we propose is that of the laws of nature, that of understanding the reality through the methods of science. So again, it's not anything to do with capitalism, socialism, or communism, but understanding what our technical capacity is on the planet globally and figuring out what the most efficient and sustainable way is to manage these resources on a global level. That's not based on what makes most sense from a monetary perspective, but what makes most sense from the use of resources.
But I'm still not sure what you're advocating. Is there going to be a group of individuals that sit down in a room and try to decide the best way to manage our resources, and then they issue orders that the rest of us just have to comply with?
No, okay, so you're basically asking about the system of governance that we're proposing, I suppose, right?
Yeah, you're saying that you want to figure out. See, I think the market figures out the best way to utilize resources all by itself, so it happens naturally.
As I try to make this point in a disjointed fashion, the market system indeed figures out the most efficient way to manage resources, but only with respect to price efficiency, not true efficiency with respect to the intelligent management of the Earth's resources with the goal of peak efficiency and sustainability, with the higher goal of maximizing our quality of living and protecting the integrity of the environment. This is a frame of reference completely absent in free market philosophy. No consideration is given to the immensely negative social and environmental outcomes that can occur through this process of so-called market efficiency. It's just implicitly assumed that the market will find the best way, not to mention all the manipulation of values through advertising and marketing that generate false consumer demand due to the market's requirement of constant consumption. But that's a topic for later on in this interview.
Right, but what you're talking about is a group of... Yeah, you're talking about
on a monetary perspective, though. No, not really.
We're talking about... No, but the way the market... Yeah, let me. The way the market works, right? You have a finite amount of resources, right? And so the market tries to figure out the most efficient way to allocate or utilize or combine these finite resources to produce the maximum economic benefit for the most people. That's what the market does through the price mechanism of supply and demand. Resources get allocated to their highest and best use. It happens automatically as a result of profit-seeking entrepreneurs. And so this is what happens in a free market. Now, in a command economy or a socialist model, you substitute the wisdom of a few bureaucrats for the market, and they're supposed to divine the best allocation of resources. But it seems to me that you're trying to move in that direction by maybe having a group of people try to figure out the optimal resource allocation and then come up with a blueprint, right? And try to be from the top down.
It's actually nothing like that, Peter. It's nothing like that. And I understand the tendency to create this association that, you know, any critique of the market is some sort of command economy, some sort of planned, you know, economy a la socialism or communism. But it's really not like that. The best label I could slap on it is that we're advocating the use of a systems approach. It's an engineering term. So we look at the Earth as as one single interconnected synergistic system where everything essentially relies on everything else. You know, economy in Greek stems from the Greek word management of a household, and we're doing a terrible job of managing the resources across the planet. The market only does this with respect to what makes sense from an efficiency perspective via prices. It doesn't actually price efficiency does not equal technical or resource efficiency necessarily, because the market is really only concerned with economizing things in monetary terms, and we're so used to thinking that everything.
Matt, if you think the market mechanism is not producing the optimal resource allocation, how do you alter that without some kind of a government force or government control to interfere with or you know with what the market is doing? How else could you change the market but without some legal force to require it?
Right. So this is where we need to get into the concept, I suppose, of a post-scarcity society. And this is why I referenced earlier that we need to really look at what our technical capacity is on the planet globally. We can easily feed everyone across all over the planet many times over. We can power the world with renewable energies for thousands of years without having to resort to fossil fuels. We have incredible technologies that can raise the standard of living of all of us and free most of us from the arbitrary, mundane drudgery that many of us have to endure on a daily basis. So this is our technical reality. Now, we can use the market system or the monetary system and continue to use prices to allocate all these resources, or we can look at what our technical capacity can allow us. So money was relevant in times where scarcity was a reality. Now, you mentioned that the reality that there are finite resources on this planet. Absolutely. But we also have the ability now to produce a global abundance of many of the, if not pretty much most of all the world's, of the needs of all the world's population, which would cancel out the need to have this medium of exchange or money. So a system that would move beyond the market in the sense of it wouldn't even need to have prices because all goods would be available in abundance is not a socialist economy. It's not market. It's not a market system.
Well, you're still
economy.
Losing me, Matt. As to
okay,
what exactly are you what exactly are you advocating?
In this brief bit, I tried to explain a basic underlying train of thought put forward by the Zeitgeist movement. Peter asked about how goods could be allocated in a non-free market system. My explanation started off by explaining why we think we need a market system, and indeed why markets came into existence historically, which were to manage scarce resources. I introduced the concept of a post-scarcity economy, which is simply a scenario where a society's technological capabilities are such that we're able to output an abundance of as many life-supporting necessities as technically possible. This capability to produce abundance renders money as a medium of exchange obsolete. So Peter's lack of understanding of what we're advocating is rooted in his presuppositions of market ideology, as will be even more evident later on. Let's continue.
Are there laws that the Zeitgeist movement wants enacted? Are there laws that they want repealed? I mean, are you calling for a change in a system of government? I mean, are there points like this is what we want to do? Point 1, point 2, and 2. I understand what your objectives are. To have a better utilization of the resources that we have, our technology, to improve the lives of more people. I'm looking for the mechanism that you guys are in favor of bringing this change about.
As I tried to briefly explain before, the mechanism for resource management, which is non-monetary, is a systems approach applied to our planet with the goal of optimized efficiency and thus sustainability. Peter's lack of comprehension of this point, which I can't really fault him for, given that he's likely completely new to this perspective, is likely rooted in a lack of comprehension about human behavior, and riddled with countless flawed assumptions about human behavior, about what motivates us, about our true so-called human nature, and so forth. After his next question here, as I wasn't sure how much time I had, I simply referred people to our materials to get more information.
Specifically, what is it that you want done?
Well, there's two separate questions there, really. There's one is what is the goal, and two is how to get there. The transition is always a tricky scenario, and there are many different speculative answers I could give you as to, step one, step two, step three, how do you get there? But I'm describing essentially what the train of thought is that underpins what we could call this resource-based economy. And unfortunately, due to the short segment of the show, it's hard to describe an entirely new socioeconomic system that most people don't have any frame of reference for, since it's not based in the monetary or market system. So what I reference people to is check out the third film of the Zeitgeist film series, Zeitgeist Moving Forward, as well as www.thezeitgeistmovement.com, and explains a lot of this stuff in a lot more detail. It's
well, I would say,
really
look, I still got another segment, and there's a commercial break, and you can think about it. But if you can't, see, you've got to be able to describe, certainly, in a 5-minute presentation, exactly what you want to do. I know what your goal is, right? Your goal is a more perfect society, a better, higher living standards. I mean, you want to make everybody's lives better. Fine. But what I need from you, because if someone is like, hey, I wonder if I should sign up and be part of this Zeitgeist movement, what is it specifically that the movement is behind doing? I know what your goals are. I know what the ends is. What's the means to get there? What are we supposed to do? What are the laws that we need to change, right, in order to achieve this? So you have to have that for people to get behind your movement. They got to know what you're trying to move, what you're trying to do to accomplish your goals. It's one thing to have all kinds of idealistic, lofty goals about the way the world could be. Right, that's great. But how do we get from the world is right now to where you want it to be?
Peter's asked about 4 or 5 questions there that I didn't get to respond to as he went to break after this segment. But briefly, one of the Zeitgeist movement's main goals currently is to educate the public about the true underlying causes of our broadest social problems, where they are truly emanating from, at the lowest common denominator. Whereas Schiff only goes so far as the government being responsible for many problems, our analysis extends the perspective further than that, as the reason governments often behave in such corrupt manners is rooted in the market system set of motivating principles, as touched on prior. The other main goal of the Zeitgeist movement is to educate the public on what our true technical reality is with respect to the social problems we can alleviate and the amazing standard of living we could produce for every human on the planet if we use science and technology wisely.
I mean, my theory is capitalism, free markets, get the government out of the way, let society solve the world's problems, let profit-seeking entrepreneurs figure out a better way to make everybody's lives better so they can get rich. So that's my roadmap to what you want, is free market capitalism, get rid of government. I want your roadmap.
As denoted throughout the Zeitgeist movement's literature and videos, the very forces inherent in the free market are the ones causing the problems Peter acknowledged at the beginning of the show. I've already addressed this point prior, so I won't belabor the point too much. But I'll repeat, his version of the free market is an idealized fantasy where everything will be great if only we can get rid of the government. By limiting government, you've done nothing to change the behavioral mechanisms that produce corruption and everything else we see today. Obviously, I'm not in favor of the government, and I recognize it's part of creating and exacerbating social problems, but as an extension of what the market does, not as some separate force.
What do we do? What do we change? So think about that. We got a quick break. We'll be right back. And we're talking with Matt Berkowitz. He's the coordinator of the Vancouver chapter of the Zeitgeist movement. It's part of their international lecture team. And what I'm trying to figure out, Matt, is I know what your goals are. So let's not talk about your goals. I want to talk about the means of accomplishing those goals. So if somebody is living in America right now and they're like, yeah, I want to be part of this Zeitgeist movement. So what is it exactly that we're supposed to be trying to do legislatively, politically, in order to bring about what you want? I mean, what are the laws that we're supposed to be trying to enact? I mean, what is it that you're proposing?
Our efforts don't really necessarily engage the political system directly. We're more of a social movement, and we try to point out different realities on an educational level of the direction we can move towards in society. In the first segment, I tried to describe some of our tenets, some of the trains of thought that we put forward. But let me try to expand on that a little to make it clearer.
So it's just a social movement. So how do we change our behavior? That I'm not even. So what do we do socially to bring about the change that you want, without laws?
We need to understand what's technically possible on the planet. So if we take for example, the laws of nature on a human and habitat level, and we start to calculate what our options are and possibilities are technically, without reference to historical assumptions on economic thought, a completely different socioeconomic landscape emerges. So let me try to describe that very briefly. So we can label it a resource-based economy. Since we all need resources to survive, we advocate that this should be the starting point for socioeconomic activity rather than the abstraction of money, since we live in a world now where global abundance is technically possible, and we don't have to live with the reality of scarcity on most fundamental levels. So the first step in setting something like this up would be to do a full survey of the Earth's resources, figure out what we have, we understand all the different renewable energy potentials we have.
Well, okay, who's gonna do that survey? Who's doing that survey? Who's paying for it?
Well, there's many different transition scenarios, but in terms of who's going to be doing it, people who are technically trained in that respective field, just like.
But
today,
they're just going to do it. But why are they going to do it? Just because they're part of the zeitgeist movement? They're just going to quit their jobs and just work for free and just try to survey the resources?
Right. Well, this is the other angle that the zeitgeist movement tries to put forward. In order to move towards a new social system, our values need to undergo significant change. Now, today, our social values, competition and me out for myself, first and foremost, these values are an outgrowth of the market system's behavioral propensities. We're advocating that if we want to solve many of the world's problems, if we want to alleviate many of the global pressures we have, our values need to change. I mean, we're not.
But how can our values? How can our
Sorry?
values change? I mean, how? So your movement requires, in order for it to be a success, every individual has to decide that the values that they hold now and their whole value system is wrong, and that we need to value something else.
I wouldn't necessarily put it so bluntly as Peter did here, but what the zeitgeist movement advocates is a recognition that in order for our economic practices to be sustainable, our values need to undergo considerable change to reflect the natural laws. These could be termed sustainable values. Our values that exist today are completely manipulated by the market system's underlying mechanisms that promote consumption at all expenses. He proclaims a sense of incredulity that our values can change, as though social values are somehow stagnant and not subject to cultural and social evolution. Today in the U.S., consumption is double what it was in the middle of the 20th century. Despite declining oil reserves, we're consuming more and more oil every year. Global meat production and consumption continues to rise to unprecedented levels, causing immense environmental and habitat damage. This is all obviously a symptom of the market system's built-in structure that demands higher and higher levels of consumption. So what else do you expect?
I mean, right now people pretty much value a higher standard of living for themselves. They want to have more things. They want to have more fun. They want to have more leisure. They want to spend time with their families. I mean,
yes, many people do indeed hold these values, which are laudable, but the market system inhibits these values from actually being adhered to and promotes a different set of contrarian values based on the principles of the market, not social sustainability.
Which of our values are you hoping that we all abandoned, and then what new values do you want everybody to embrace?
Well, I mean, for one thing, judging everything based off in monetary figures. Another one would be the competitive mindset in all areas of life, from economic to educational system.
I have to pause here because he's derailing the point I'm making and veering it off into another direction. More needs to be said about the value transition that needs to occur if we as a species actually care to live in a stable, peaceful, socially unprejudiced society. Our values today are provably a direct result of the social environment we are raised in. If you were raised 500 or 600 years ago in the Mexican Aztec culture, you'd hold a value system promoted by their culture. If you were raised in the Middle East into an oppressive religious background with no outside influences, you're most likely to embody those values and beliefs. We need to recognize that, like scientific models, some values are closer approximations to reality, and others are far off. Some work better, and others do not. The values that are pervasive in our global monetary culture today are highly dysfunctional and an outgrowth of the underlying value programming system, i.e. our socio-economic system. What the Zeitgeist movement advocates thus is a shift towards what could be termed sustainable values. In other words, values that are functional as defined by our most updated scientific understandings and thus the laws of nature themselves.
You actually want to eliminate money from society?
But it's not really just eliminating it, it's outgrowing the need for it, just like we're not really anti-capitalist.
But we can't. You're like saying I want to outgrow the need for oxygen. Or outgrow the need for blood.
That's a false analogy. Money
is probably one of the greatest inventions of mankind, and you're saying let's get rid of it. Now, of course, if we get rid of money, then what are we going to have, a barter system? But how is going back to a barter economy going to further your goal?
So this is why I brought up the distinction of scarcity versus abundance. Money is absolutely necessary, or it's useful in conditions where scarcity is a reality. Now, like I tried to explain, our technical reality is such that we easily have the ability to produce an abundance of all the world's the necessities of life.
No, we don't. So
can
we have an abundance of? Can we have an abundance of Ferraris or Lamborghinis? Can they exist? Can we make enough Lamborghinis so that everybody can have one? Can we make enough mega yachts so that everybody can? No, we don't have abundance. We have scarcity.
And here we have at play the truly sick mindset born out of market ideology. There are so many layers of projection and false assumptions of human behavior buried in that statement that I don't even know where to begin. For one thing, there is the assumption that humans have unlimited desires, and if uninhibited by a price system that forces you to curb your reckless desires, everyone will go out and mindlessly all consume in such a conspicuous manner. This is provably untrue from countless angles. This unsustainable value is rooted in a behavioral ethos called status competition, where people go out and purchase not for any utilitarian purpose, but rather for reasons of ego, vanity, status, and other culturally relative notions. In the first world countries with the least amount of income inequality, people tend to display much less status competition than in the more unequal countries. There is actually a highly statistically significant correlation between the two. Consult the book The Spirit Level by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, chapters 10 and 15, for the relevant research on this topic. The logical deduction is that if you remove the basis of income inequality completely, which is, of course, the monetary market system, you drastically reduce, if not completely eliminate, the drive for status competition. The second, which I'm about to attempt to cover, is that of distinguishing between needs and wants, which of course there is no distinction for in the market system. They are the same thing, since money buys needs and money buys wants. I'll let it play and then respond further.
And the only way you can allocate resources is by putting a price on them. To say that we have an abundance of everything, we don't. Yeah.
One sec, Peter. So we certainly have I said we have an abundance of the necessities of life. So food, energy, transportation, education. Those specifics you're talking about are obviously subjective ways that people have of meeting their more quantifiable
But we don't even
needs.
have an abundance. Do we have an abundance of steak? Or do we have abundance of caviar or lobster?
He's completely missing my point. Needs are objective. We all need food. The specific foods we eat are the subjective ways we choose to meet these needs. And as mentioned, these wants are completely determined by the culture you're in.
I mean, no. I mean,
so yes, I'm talking about the staple food, not necessarily the specific.
Yeah, but what if somebody wants? But what if somebody wants lobster, right? How is it going to be? You need to have money to figure out who gets the lobsters, unless you're going to have some bureaucrats deciding who gets to eat lobster and who has to have rice.
Or you need to have a different socioeconomic system that promotes different values, ones that aren't so
values where people.
unsustainable.
But Matt, that's never going to. You're saying so people have to stop wanting things. People have to stop wanting lobster and just be satisfied with eating bread and rice.
I'll just reiterate again that yes, people's values absolutely must change if we want to actually change our course as a species to remain sustainable and thus survive. There is no way you can continue the current socioeconomic system, albeit with reduced government, which isn't going to change a thing when it comes to ecological sustainability, without ultimately producing the collapse of our society due to us overconsuming the Earth's resources and destroying the environment to the extent that it becomes uninhabitable.
But you instead of trying to dumb everybody down so that we all want minimal, so that everybody can have
that's not what we're doing.
Standard of living. Well, what are you trying to do?
Again, you need to understand the train of thought before you go into these different examples that I can certainly explain, but the train of thought needs to be understood first. So money, yes, it's necessary if you have a scarcity of something, but if you have...
We have a scarcity of things. Nothing exists in complete... Energy, we don't have enough energy for everybody to use all the energy they want. We have to have a price associated with that energy so that people economize their use.
Actually, we very much do have all the energy production potential we could ever need or reasonably want in a sustainable society. As is documented throughout all of the Zeitgeist Movement's literature, we have nothing but total energy abundance if you look at mediums like geothermal, wind, solar, wave, and tidal. An MIT report in 2006, for example, showed that we can meet the world's energy needs for 4,000 years in geothermal power alone. If you remove the monetary system, along with the countless socially pointless jobs since they relate only to money management, and remove all the technically redundant jobs since they can be automated, you remove a humongous basis for most of the world's energy requirements. If you replace the current transportation infrastructure set up for gas-powered cars and convert them to hybrids or electrics, and replace the airplane mode of transit with something like vacuum tube maglev trains, which are possible today, you remove another basis for much energy consumption. With the removal of the monetary system, which requires consumption at all levels, another level of energy needs are eliminated. That's just a few examples of how we waste an insane amount of energy and other resources. If you get rid of the behavioral reinforcements that produce status competition and conspicuous consumption, you really do not need to worry about all the reckless consumption problems that Peter alludes to here.
Yes, in some futuristic Star Trek kind of world, maybe, where, everybody has a nuclear reactor in their house that can produce an unlimited amount of energy at zero cost, but we don't live in that world yet, and we need to use the market to allocate resources.
This point, of course, becomes moot when you realize the point of how we can produce a global abundance for all life-supporting needs for everyone, and how our values and behavior are a product of the social environment that we're groomed in.
But, Matt, hey, we're out of time. If anybody wants to learn more, maybe they can watch your movies, figure out this stuff. Hour 2 of the Peter...
With that said, I'd like to thank Peter Schiff for having me on. Hopefully we can continue the dialogue at a later date when hopefully he'll be more familiar with the Zeitgeist Movement's tenets. Thanks for listening, everyone.